At my son's engagement party, his fiancée's father spent the entire evening lecturing me about how small trucking companies like mine could never compete with major corporations. He kept praising one particular logistics company, explaining how much better they were than local operators. He had no idea he was digging his own grave with every word. When the truth finally came out, it didn't just humiliate him, it cost him everything he'd worked for. What happened next will shock you. Before we continue, please subscribe to stay updated on our latest stories. The phone call that started everything came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I was already awake, sitting in my kitchen with coffee and the Wall Street Journal, reviewing quarterly reports from my various holdings. At 68, I'd learned that early mornings were when I did my best thinking before the world demanded my attention. "Dad?" She said yes. Tommy's voice carried the kind of joy that only comes with life's biggest moments. My son had been carrying around his grandmother's engagement ring for 3 months, waiting for the perfect moment to propose to Jennifer Blackwood. "Congratulations, son. I'm proud of you both." "Thanks, Dad." "Listen, Jennifer's parents want to throw an engagement party this Saturday. Nothing too big, just family and close friends. You'll come, right?" "Of course." There was a pause, and I could hear something in Tommy's voice that I recognized from his childhood, the careful tone he used when he was worried about how I might react to something. "Dad, I should probably mention Jennifer's family is pretty successful. Her father owns a manufacturing company. They live in Greenwich. You know the type. They might seem a little—" "A little what?" "Formal, I guess. Different from how we do things." I smiled, thinking about the assumptions people always made about the quiet man in khakis who drove a 10-year-old Honda. After 40 years of building Henderson Group holdings from a single delivery truck, I'd grown comfortable with being underestimated. "Don't worry about me, Tommy. I can handle formal." What I didn't tell him was that I was curious to meet the Blackwood family. In my experience, successful people who felt the need to appear impressive usually had something to prove, and people with something to prove often revealed more than they intended. Saturday evening brought me to one of Greenwich's most exclusive neighborhoods, where old money whispered rather than shouted. The Blackwood estate sat behind manicured hedges and wrought-iron gates, a Georgian colonial that spoke of generations of accumulated wealth. I parked my Honda between a BMW and a Mercedes, both gleaming under the evening lights. Through the large windows I could see well-dressed people moving through rooms that belonged in architectural magazines. The front door opened before I could ring the bell. "You must be Bill Henderson." The man extending his hand was exactly what I'd expected, silver-haired, well-tailored, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. This had to be Richard Blackwood, Jennifer's father and tonight's host. "Dick Blackwood. Great to finally meet Tommy's dad." His handshake was firm but brief, and I caught his eyes making a quick assessment of my simple clothes and understated appearance. The calculation was automatic, unconscious, and exactly what I'd anticipated. "Pleasure to meet you, Dick. Tommy tells me you're in transportation?" "That's right." "Excellent. Transportation is the backbone of American commerce, isn't it? Good, honest work." The patronizing tone was so subtle that Dick probably didn't even realize he was using it. But I'd heard it countless times over the years, the way people talked down to those they assumed were beneath them professionally. "It keeps me busy." "I'll bet it does." "Come on in. Let me introduce you to some folks." Dick led me through rooms filled with expensive art and antique furniture, each introduction carrying the same subtle message about where I fit in their social hierarchy. This is Bill Henderson, Tommy's father. Runs a trucking company. Bill, meet Jim Crawford. Jim's a corporate attorney. Here's someone you might relate to, Bill. Carol manages logistics for a construction firm. Each introduction was carefully calculated to establish that I was the blue-collar outsider being graciously welcomed into their white-collar world. The party itself was elegant but comfortable, with perhaps 40 guests who clearly knew each other well. I found myself in a group of men around my age, all successful in their various fields, all sharing war stories about business challenges and market conditions. "So, Bill," said a man named Steve Morrison, who owned a chain of sporting goods stores, "how's the trucking business treating you? Must be tough with all the new regulations. Every industry has its challenges." "I'll bet. All that DOT paperwork, hours of service rules, liability issues. How do you small operators stay competitive?" Before I could answer, Dick jumped in with the authority of someone who understood my business better than I did. "The key for guys like Bill is finding a niche that the big companies can't serve efficiently. Specialized cargo, local routes, personal service. That's where smaller operations can compete." I sipped my drink and let Dick continue his lecture about my own industry, curious to see how far his expertise would take him. "The big national carriers, companies like Henderson Logistics, Transglobal, Swift, they're all about volume and scale. They can't provide the kind of personal attention that smaller companies offer." My pulse quickened slightly, but I kept my expression neutral. Dick had just mentioned my company, the crown jewel of Henderson Group Holdings, while explaining to me why I couldn't compete with businesses like it. "You're familiar with Henderson Logistics?" I asked casually. "Oh, absolutely. Best transportation company on the East Coast, maybe in the country. We use them for all our shipping at Blackwood Industries." The irony was so perfect it was almost painful. Dick was praising my company while simultaneously explaining why my company was superior to businesses like mine. "What makes them so good?" Dick warmed to his subject, clearly pleased to demonstrate his business acumen. "It's their integrated approach. They don't just move freight. They manage entire supply chains, warehousing, distribution, just-in-time delivery, inventory management. The guy who built that company was a genius." "You know much about the owner? Henderson?" "Nobody knows much about him personally. Very private guy, stays completely out of the spotlight. Smart strategy, actually. Let the business speak for itself." I nodded thoughtfully, fascinated by Dick's analysis of my own management philosophy. "Sounds like they know what they're doing." "Oh, they absolutely do. We've been using them for 12 years, and they've never missed a delivery deadline. Not once. That's the difference between professional logistics management and just moving boxes from point A to point B." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Dick explaining the transportation industry to me while praising the very company I'd spent 4 decades building. Other men joined in, sharing their own experiences with major logistics firms and offering insights about why smaller operators struggled to compete. Through it all, I maintained my humble demeanor, asking occasional questions that encouraged them to elaborate while never revealing that I probably understood their businesses better than they did. But something was building inside me. Not anger exactly, but a kind of cold amusement at the absurdity of the situation. These successful, intelligent men were lecturing me about my own industry while praising my own achievements, completely unaware of who they were talking to. "Bill probably knows all about competing with the big boys," Steve Morrison said. "Must be frustrating to bid against companies with that kind of resources." "How do you handle it?" asked another man. "When you're up against Henderson Logistics for a contract, what's your strategy?" I paused, considering my answer carefully. The room had grown quiet, waiting for the small trucking company owner to explain his David versus Goliath approach to business competition. "We try to focus on what we do best," I said finally. "Smart approach," Dick nodded approvingly. "Play to your strengths. Avoid direct competition with the major players. That's basic business survival, though it must limit your growth potential," observed Jim Crawford, the attorney. "At some point, don't you hit a ceiling? Growth has never been my primary concern." "That's refreshing," Dick said with the tone of someone praising a child for lowered expectations. "Too many small business owners get obsessed with expansion and end up destroying themselves. Better to stay profitable at a manageable size." The patronizing advice continued through dinner, with Dick and his friends sharing their wisdom about business management, market strategy, and the realities of competing in industries dominated by large corporations. I found myself seated between Patricia Blackwood, Dick's wife, and a woman named Susan who worked in hospital administration. The conversation at our end of the table was pleasant enough, covering local politics, vacation destinations, and the usual topics that occupied successful professionals. But I couldn't help overhearing the discussion at Dick's end of the table, where he was holding court about business philosophy and market dynamics. "The mistake most small operators make," Dick was saying, "is thinking they can compete head-to-head with companies that have 10 times their resources. It's not about being better. It's about being smarter." "What do you mean?" asked someone. "Take transportation, for example. A small trucking company can't compete with Henderson Logistics on price or capacity, but they can compete on flexibility, personal relationships, specialized knowledge of local markets." Dick glanced in my direction, clearly intending his comments as helpful guidance for the humble truck driver at the other end of the table. "The key is knowing your place in the ecosystem," he continued. "Every successful business has to understand what they can and can't do." Knowing your place. The phrase hung in the air like smoke, carrying all of Dick's assumptions about business hierarchies and natural order. It was during dessert that Dick made the comment that changed everything. "Bill, I hope you won't take this wrong, but I'm impressed by how well Tommy turned out, coming from your background." The table went quiet. Even in polite company, there were some things that shouldn't be said out loud. "What I mean is," Dick continued, apparently not noticing the awkward silence, "it shows that success isn't just about money or status. Good parenting transcends economic circumstances." Patricia put her hand on her husband's arm. "Dick." "No, I think it's important to acknowledge." Tommy's achievements, Harvard MBA, position at Goldman Sachs, those aren't accidents. That comes from values, from work ethic, from a father who taught him that success is possible regardless of where you start. Dick looked directly at me with what he probably thought was respectful recognition. "You should be proud, Bill. You overcame your limitations and raised an exceptional son." "Overcame my limitations." The words settled over the table like a heavy blanket, making everyone uncomfortable except Dick, who seemed pleased with his gracious acknowledgment of my parenting despite my humble circumstances. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care, feeling the weight of 40 pairs of eyes watching my reaction. The room had gone completely silent, except for the soft classical music playing in the background. Tommy was staring at his plate, his face flushed with embarrassment at his future father-in-law's casual condescension. Jennifer looked mortified, clearly recognizing that her father had crossed a line he didn't even know existed, but I felt something else entirely. A cold, precise clarity about exactly what needed to happen next. I looked directly at Dick, who was still smiling with the satisfaction of someone who believed he'd just offered a meaningful compliment. "Dick," I said quietly, "there's something I think you should know." "Of course, Bill." "What is it?" The entire table leaned forward slightly, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Tommy raised his head, his eyes meeting mine across the table with an expression that mixed apprehension with curiosity. "I appreciate your comments about Tommy's success," I continued, my voice carrying easily in the silent room. "You're right that it comes from values and work ethic." "Absolutely." "Those things matter more than money." "They do. Though I should probably mention something that might change your perspective on tonight's conversation." Dick's smile flickered slightly. "What's that?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my business card. Not the simple one I usually carried, but the formal one with the Henderson Group Holdings letterhead and all my various titles listed beneath my name. I placed it on the table in front of Dick with the same deliberate care I'd used to set down my coffee cup. This might clear up some confusion about my background. Dick picked up the card, his eyes scanning the text. I watched his expression change as he processed what he was reading, his confident smile fading into something much more complex. "Henderson Group Holdings," he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's right. William Henderson, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer." "That would be me." Dick stared at the card for another long moment, then looked up at me with an expression of dawning horror. "You're the William Henderson." "I prefer Bill." But you said you were in trucking." "I am." "Henderson Logistics is one of our subsidiaries." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear someone's watch ticking 3 seats away. "Henderson Logistics," Dick repeated, as if the words were rearranging themselves in his mouth. "The company I've been telling you about all evening." "The same one. The company that handles all our shipping." "Among others." Dick set the business card down with trembling fingers, his face cycling through expressions of confusion, embarrassment, and what looked like growing panic. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. All night I've been explaining my own business to me," I finished gently. "Yes." The ripple effect was immediate. Word of my identity spread around the table in whispered conversations and shocked expressions. The man they'd been politely tolerating as the blue-collar father-in-law was actually one of the region's most successful business owners. But I wasn't finished yet. I reached for my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and found the number I was looking for. Then I placed the phone on the table where everyone could see it and pressed the speaker button. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Henderson Logistics Customer Service. This is Maria. How can I help you today?" "Maria, this is Bill Henderson. I need you to pull up the account for Blackwood Industries." "Of course, Mr. Henderson." "One moment, please." Dick had gone completely pale, finally understanding that this wasn't just about his misconceptions. This was about the very real business relationship between his company and mine. "I have the account here, sir. Blackwood Industries, Rochester, New York. They're one of our platinum-level clients, annual shipping volume approximately 2.8 million. "Thank you, Maria. Can you tell me who the primary contact is on that account?" "Richard Blackwood, company president." I looked across the table at Dick, who seemed to have stopped breathing entirely. "And what's the current status of their account?" Everything looks good, sir. All payments current, no service issues, contract renewals scheduled for next month. Perfect. Maria, I need you to schedule a comprehensive service review for the Blackwood account. Full analysis of pricing, service levels, contract terms. I want our senior team to take a very close look at this relationship. Of course, Mr. Henderson. When would you like that completed? Monday morning. I'll make sure our team prioritizes it. Thank you, Maria. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The silence around the table was deafening. Dick was staring at me with the expression of a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. "Bill," he said, his voice barely audible, "please, I didn't know. I never meant—" "Didn't mean what, Dick?" "The things I said. About your limitations, about small operators, about God, all of it." I leaned back in my chair, studying the faces around the table. 40 successful, intelligent people who had just learned that their assumptions about social hierarchies and business success were not only wrong, but dangerously wrong. "Dick, I'm curious about something. Anything. What do you want to know?" "When you learned who I really was, did that change your opinion of Tommy?" Dick blinked, clearly confused by the question. "What?" "No, of course not. Tommy's achievements speak for themselves." "But it changed your opinion of me." "Well, yes, obviously. So you respect me more now that you know I'm wealthy and successful?" Yes, I mean, I respected you before, but—" "But you didn't, really." "You patronized me. You explained my own industry to me. You told me about my limitations and praised me for overcoming them." Dick opened his mouth, then closed it, finally understanding the trap his own words had created. "The point is, Dick, I'm exactly the same person I was 30 minutes ago. Same values, same intelligence, same character. The only thing that changed was your knowledge of my bank balance." I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for a fascinating evening. You've taught me something important about assumptions and the people who make them." I walked around the table to where Tommy sat, still looking stunned by the evening's revelations. "Son, congratulations again on your engagement. Jennifer seems like a wonderful girl." Tommy stood and embraced me, whispering in my ear, "Dad, I had no idea you were planning this." "Neither did I," I whispered back. "Sometimes these things just develop naturally." I turned to Jennifer, who was watching the scene with wide eyes. "Jennifer, welcome to the family. I think you'll find we're full of surprises." Finally, I faced Dick, who remained seated with the business card still clutched in his hand. "Dick, it's been educational meeting you. I'm sure we'll have many opportunities to get to know each other better in the months ahead." "Bill, please, can we talk privately?" "Of course. But first, let me ask you something." I gestured toward the other guests, who were watching our exchange with fascination. "Everyone in this room heard what you said about my limitations and Tommy overcoming his background. What do you think they're thinking right now?" Dick looked around the table at faces that reflected everything from embarrassment to barely concealed amusement. "They're thinking I'm an idiot." "And what does that tell you about the assumptions you make about people?" Dick was quiet for a long moment, processing not just his own humiliation, but the deeper lesson embedded in it. "It tells me I need to be more careful about judging people based on appearances." "That's a start." I picked up my business card from the table and slipped it back into my pocket. "Dick, I'll be in touch about that service review. I'm very interested to see what our team discovers about the Blackwood Industries account." With that, I walked out of the dining room, through the elegant foyer, and into the cool night air, leaving behind a table full of people who had just learned that the quiet man in khakis controlled their host's entire business relationship with the outside world. But this was just the beginning. What happened on Monday morning would teach Dick Blackwood and everyone else at that party something they would never forget about the cost of underestimating people. The real education was about to begin. Monday morning came sooner than Dick Blackwood had hoped. By 7:30 a.m., he was pacing in his office, his coffee growing cold as he stared at his phone, willing it not to ring. But deep down, he knew it would. Men like William Henderson didn't make empty threats, and the comprehensive service review that had been scheduled for this morning was about to determine the future of everything he'd built. The first call came at exactly 8 a.m. "Mr. Blackwood, this is Jennifer Stevens from Henderson Logistics. I'm the senior account manager who'll be conducting your service review today." Dick's grip tightened on the phone. He'd been dreading this moment since Saturday night, when he'd realized exactly who he'd been lecturing about business strategy. "Yes, I've been expecting your call." "Excellent. I'll need to review your shipping volume, delivery requirements, and current contract terms. Can you have your logistics team available for a conference call at 9:30? "Of course. Whatever you need." "Perfect. Oh, and Mr. Blackwood, Mr. Henderson has asked me to give your account special attention. He mentioned you two had an interesting conversation over the weekend." Dick closed his eyes. Special attention from William Henderson was the last thing his company needed right now. After hanging up, he immediately called his logistics manager, his operations director, and his CFO. Within 20 minutes, they were gathered in his office, all wearing the worried expressions of people who sensed something was very wrong. "We have a situation," Dick began, then spent the next 10 minutes explaining how he'd discovered that his daughter's future father-in-law owned the company that handled all their shipping. "Jesus, Dick," said his CFO, Sarah Martinez. "How bad was the conversation?" "Bad enough that Henderson ordered a comprehensive review of our entire business relationship." "What does that mean exactly?" asked Operations Director Mike Chen. Dick looked out his office window at the factory floor where 200 employees were starting their Monday morning routine, completely unaware that their jobs might depend on the next few hours. "It means William Henderson is about to decide whether Blackwood Industries deserves to continue existing." The 9:30 conference call was unlike anything Dick had experienced in 35 years of business. Jennifer Stevens was professional, thorough, and absolutely relentless in her analysis of every aspect of their shipping relationship. "Your current contract shows a 12% annual increase in shipping volume over the past 5 years, she noted, "but your on-time pickup rate has declined by 7% in the same period." "We've had some operational challenges," Dick explained. "I see that. Your rush delivery requests have increased by 34% year over year, which suggests planning issues on your end." Sarah Martinez jumped in. "We've been growing rapidly. Sometimes our production schedules get compressed." "Understood, but these rush deliveries cost Henderson Logistics significantly more to accommodate. Our drivers have to adjust their routes, our dispatch team has to coordinate special pickups, and our customer service team handles additional communications." Dick felt sweat forming on his forehead. Every question revealed another way his company had been making Henderson Logistics' job more difficult and expensive. "What about damaged cargo claims?" Jennifer continued. "You've filed 17 claims in the past 2 years, totaling $47,000. "That's within industry standards," Mike Chen protested. Actually, it's 23% higher than the average for manufacturers your size, which suggests either inadequate packaging on your end or unrealistic expectations about transit damage. The interrogation continued for another hour, with Jennifer systematically documenting every inefficiency, every cost overrun, every way that Blackwood Industries had been a less-than-ideal customer. When the call ended, Dick's team sat in stunned silence. "They're building a case," Sarah said quietly. "A case for what?" "For dropping us as a customer." Dick's phone buzzed with a text message. "Mr. Blackwood, please call me at your earliest convenience. Bill Henderson." His hands were trembling as he dialed the number. "Dick, thanks for calling so quickly." "Bill, I want to apologize again for Saturday night. I know there's no excuse for what I said." "Actually, that's not why I'm calling." Dick's heart sank. "It's not?" "No. I'm calling because my logistics team just finished their preliminary review of your account." "And?" "And I thought you deserved to hear the results directly from me." Dick closed his eyes, preparing for the worst. "Dick, are you there?" "I'm here." "Good, because we need to talk in person. Can you be at my office this afternoon?" "Of course." "What time?" 2 o'clock. And Dick, bring your CFO." The line went dead, leaving Dick staring at his phone with the distinct feeling that his entire business was about to disappear. Henderson Group. Holdings occupied 3 floors of a Manhattan skyscraper that Dick had driven past hundreds of times without ever imagining he'd be summoned inside. The lobby was understated but impressive, with the kind of quiet elegance that suggested serious money without ostentation. At exactly 2 p.m., Dick and Sarah were escorted to the 42nd floor, where William Henderson's office occupied a corner with commanding views of both the Hudson River and Central Park. But it was Henderson himself who surprised Dick most. The man who controlled a billion-dollar empire was dressed in the same simple khakis and polo shirt he'd worn to the engagement party, sitting behind a modest desk that could have belonged to any middle manager. "Dick, Sarah, thanks for coming." Henderson gestured to chairs arranged around a small conference table where several folders were already waiting. "I wanted to discuss your account review in person because the situation is more complex than a simple phone call could address." Dick braced himself. "First, the facts. Your company has been a Henderson Logistics customer for 12 years. In that time, you've generated approximately $34 million in shipping revenue for us." He opened one of the folders. "However, your account has also been one of our most expensive to service. The operational inefficiencies, the rush delivery requests, the cargo claims. When we factor in the additional costs of managing your business, your account operates at a net profit margin of just 3.2%. Sarah leaned forward. "Is that bad?" "Our average customer generates a 12.8% margin." Dick felt his stomach drop. "So you're dropping us?" Henderson studied him for a long moment. "That would be the logical business decision." But business isn't always purely logical. Sometimes other factors come into play." Dick waited, afraid to hope. "The fact is, Dick, you and I are about to become family. My son is marrying your daughter, which means we'll be seeing each other at holidays, birthdays, graduations, and, God willing, the births of our grandchildren." Henderson stood up and walked to the window overlooking Central Park. "I could terminate your contract and find a dozen reasons to justify it. Your margins are poor, your operations are inefficient, and frankly, finding a replacement customer wouldn't be difficult." Dick's heart was pounding so hard he was sure everyone in the room could hear it. But that would make every family gathering for the next 30 years extremely awkward. Henderson turned back to face them. So I'm going to make you an offer instead. He returned to the table and opened another folder. Henderson Group has a subsidiary called Operational Excellence Solutions. They specialize in helping manufacturers streamline their supply chain management. Consultants, Sarah said. The best consultants. They've worked with companies ranging from small family businesses to Fortune 500 corporations, helping them reduce costs, improve efficiency, and optimize their logistics operations. Henderson slid a business card across the table. I'm going to arrange for OES to conduct a complete analysis of your manufacturing and shipping operations, free of charge. Dick looked at the card suspiciously. What's the catch? The catch is that you have to implement their recommendations. All of them. And if we don't? Henderson's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Then we terminate your shipping contract and you can explain to your 200 employees why their jobs disappeared because their CEO was too proud to accept help. The silence in the room was deafening. How long do we have to decide? Sarah asked. You don't. The OES team will be at your facility Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. They'll spend a week analyzing your operations, then present their findings and recommendations. Henderson closed the folders. Dick, I want to be very clear about something. This offer has nothing to do with friendship or family relationships. It's a business decision based on the potential I see in Blackwood Industries. What potential? Your company has good products, loyal customers, and a solid reputation in your market, but you're operating at about 60% efficiency. The OES team can probably get you to 85% within 6 months. And that would improve our shipping margins dramatically. Instead of being our least profitable customer, you could become one of our most valuable accounts. Dick looked at Sarah, who nodded almost imperceptibly. We accept. Good. But I want you to understand what you're agreeing to. The OES team doesn't make suggestions. They make requirements. If they tell you to reorganize your production line, you reorganize it. If they tell you to change your inventory management system, you change it. If they tell you to fire half your management team, you fire them. The threat was delivered in the same mild tone Henderson had used to discuss shipping margins, but its implications were crystal clear. We understand. Excellent. Henderson stood up. Oh, and Dick, one more thing. Yes? The story about Saturday night stays between us. As far as anyone else knows, this is just a routine business optimization project. Of course. Good. Because if word gets out that I'm doing special favors for family members, it could damage both our reputations. As they prepared to leave, Henderson walked them to the door. Dick, I hope you understand that what happened Saturday night was a learning experience for both of us. What do you mean? You learned not to make assumptions about people based on appearances. And what did you learn? Henderson smiled, and for the first time since Saturday night, it reached his eyes. I learned that sometimes the most satisfying business deals are the ones that teach everyone involved something valuable about respect. Wednesday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth for October, but Dick felt cold as he watched 3 black SUVs pull into the Blackwood Industries parking lot at exactly 8 a.m. The OES team that emerged looked more like a military operation than business consultants. 6 men and women in identical dark suits, each carrying tablets and measuring equipment, moved through his facility with the systematic efficiency of people who had done this countless times before. Their leader was a woman named Patricia Chen, who couldn't have been more than 40, but commanded immediate respect from everyone she encountered. "Mr. Blackwood, I want you to understand that this is not a typical consulting engagement," she explained during their initial meeting. "Mr. Henderson has given us complete authority to restructure your operations as we see fit." "What exactly does that mean?" "It means that for the next week we own your factory. Every process, every procedure, every employee is subject to our analysis and potential modification." Dick felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "We'll be measuring everything: production times, material waste, worker efficiency, quality control processes, inventory turnover, maintenance schedules, energy usage, and supply chain coordination. And then? And then we'll tell you exactly what needs to change for your company to survive." The word survive hung in the air like a threat. Over the next 5 days, Dick watched the OES team systematically dissect his business. They timed every operation, interviewed every employee, and analyzed every system with ruthless precision. By Friday afternoon, they had identified 47 areas requiring immediate improvement, 19 processes that needed complete redesign, and 8 management positions that were redundant to operational efficiency. "The good news," Patricia Chen announced during their final presentation, "is that your company has significant potential for improvement." "And the bad news?" "The bad news is that implementing these changes will require letting go of some long-held assumptions about how manufacturing businesses should operate." She opened her laptop and projected a series of charts onto the conference room wall. "Your current operational efficiency is 61%. Industry standard is 78%. Best-in-class manufacturers achieve 89%. Dick studied the numbers, trying to understand what they meant for his company's future. "If you implement our recommendations fully, we project you'll reach 84% efficiency within 6 months. "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means your shipping costs will decrease by 31%, your production time will improve by 22%, and your overall profitability will increase by approximately 40%. Sarah Martinez whistled softly. "Those are significant improvements." "They are. But achieving them will require discipline, commitment, and the willingness to make some very difficult decisions." Patricia closed her laptop. "Mr. Blackwood, you have 2 choices. You can implement these changes and transform Blackwood Industries into a highly efficient, profitable manufacturer that Henderson Logistics will be proud to serve. Or you can continue operating the way you always have, and Henderson Logistics will terminate your contract in 60 days. Dick looked around the table at his senior staff, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in their faces. "How long do we have to decide?" "You don't. Implementation begins Monday morning." That weekend, Dick found himself in the uncomfortable position of having to explain to his wife and daughter why their family's business was being completely restructured by the man they'd insulted at Jennifer's engagement party. "I don't understand," Patricia Blackwood said. "If Bill Henderson is so successful, why is he helping us?" "Because," Dick replied heavily, "he's teaching me a lesson about humility." "What kind of lesson?" "The kind that costs everything if you don't learn it fast enough." Sunday evening brought a phone call from William Henderson himself. "Dick, how are you feeling about tomorrow?" "Honestly, terrified." "Good. Fear keeps you focused." "Bill, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why are you really doing this? The OES team, the efficiency improvements, all of it. You could have just dropped us and moved on." Henderson was quiet for a long moment. "Dick, Do you have any idea how much money I've made over the past 40 years? I couldn't even guess. More than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. At this point, money is just a way of keeping score. Then what motivates you? Teaching lessons that people remember. You insulted me Saturday night, not because you're a bad person, but because you made assumptions based on incomplete information. And you want me to remember that. I want everyone who was at that party to remember it, because the next time they meet someone they think they can dismiss or patronize, they'll remember what happened to Dick Blackwood. Dick felt a chill run down his spine. What happened to Dick Blackwood? That depends on you. If you implement the OES recommendations and turn your company into a model of operational efficiency, then what happened to Dick Blackwood is that he learned humility and became more successful than ever. And if I don't, then what happened to Dick Blackwood is that his arrogance cost him everything he'd worked 35 years to build. The line went quiet. The choice is yours, Dick. But choose carefully, because everyone who was at that party will be watching to see how this story ends. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, matching Dick's mood as he walked into his factory to find the OES team already at work, measuring, timing, and reorganizing everything he'd thought he understood about his own business. Patricia Chen approached him with a clipboard and the same military efficiency she'd displayed all week. Mr. Blackwood, we need to discuss the first phase of implementation. I'm listening. We're starting with your production line layout. It needs to be completely reconfigured to eliminate bottlenecks and reduce material handling time. How long will that take? If we work through the weekend, we can have it operational by next Monday. And the cost? Mr. Henderson is covering all implementation costs as part of your service contract revision. Dick stared at her. He's paying to rebuild my factory? He's investing in a more efficient customer relationship. As the week progressed, Dick watched his factory transform in ways he'd never imagined possible. Production lines were reconfigured, inventory systems were digitized, and quality control processes were streamlined with the precision of a Swiss watch. But it was the human cost that bothered him most. 8 of his management staff, people he'd worked with for years, were deemed redundant and had to be let go. The survivors were retrained on new systems and held to much higher performance standards. "This feels like I'm betraying everyone who helped build this company," he confided to Sarah during one particularly difficult day. "Maybe," she replied, "or maybe you're saving the jobs of the 200 people who would have been unemployed if Henderson had dropped our contract." By the end of the second week, the transformation was remarkable. Production times had improved by 18%, material waste had dropped by 31%, and quality control issues had virtually disappeared. But Dick knew this was just the beginning. The real test would come when Henderson Logistics conducted their next performance review, and William Henderson decided whether Dick Blackwood had learned his lesson well enough to deserve a second chance. What that decision would be, and what it would mean for everyone who had witnessed Saturday night's confrontation, remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. The quiet man in khakis had proven that sometimes the most powerful lessons were taught not through punishment, but through the opportunity to earn redemption. 3 months after the OES team's intervention, Dick Blackwood stood in his transformed factory, watching production lines that now hummed with an efficiency he'd never imagined possible. The numbers spoke for themselves. 84% operational efficiency, 31% reduction in shipping costs, and a 40% increase in overall profitability. But the real test was coming today. William Henderson was scheduled to arrive at 2 p.m. for what he'd called a final assessment of the changes made to Blackwood Industries. Whatever he decided would determine not just the future of Dick's business relationship with Henderson Logistics, but the fate of everyone who had witnessed that humiliating Saturday night 3 months ago. The phone call had come that morning. "Dick, I'll be bringing a few people with me this afternoon," Henderson had said in his characteristically understated way. "Of course." "Who should I expect?" "Just some folks who've been curious about how our little efficiency project turned out." Something in Henderson's tone had made Dick nervous. The billionaire never did anything without multiple layers of purpose, and this visit felt like more than a routine business assessment. At exactly 2 p.m., a convoy of black SUVs pulled into the Blackwood Industries parking lot. Dick watched from his office window as William Henderson emerged from the lead vehicle, followed by several people in expensive suits carrying tablets and briefcases. But it was the third vehicle that made Dick's blood run cold. Jim Crawford, the corporate attorney from the engagement party, stepped out, followed by Steve Morrison, the sporting goods store owner. Then came Carol Manning from the construction company, and finally Patricia Chen, not the OES consultant, but Patricia Blackwood, his own wife. Henderson had brought the witnesses. "Mr. Blackwood?" His secretary's voice came through the intercom. "Your visitors are here." Dick straightened his tie and walked to the elevator, his mind racing through possible explanations for why Henderson had assembled an audience for this meeting. The group was waiting in the main conference room, and Dick could immediately sense the tension. These were the people who had watched him lecture Henderson about business while unknowingly insulting one of the region's most powerful executives. They were here to see how the story ended. Henderson stood at the head of the table, still wearing his signature khakis and polo shirt, looking exactly like the humble truck driver Dick had mistaken him for 3 months ago. "Dick, thank you for hosting us today. I thought it would be educational for everyone to see what can happen when businesses embrace change." Educational. The word carried layers of meaning that everyone in the room understood. "Before we tour the facility," Henderson continued, "I wanted to share some numbers that might interest everyone here." He opened a folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. 3 months ago, Blackwood Industries was operating at 61% efficiency with a shipping cost ratio that made them one of our least profitable customers. Dick felt his face flush as Henderson shared details of his company's former inefficiencies with the same people who had heard him pontificate about business strategy. Today, after implementing the recommended changes, Blackwood Industries is operating at 84% efficiency with shipping costs that have been reduced by 31%. Jim Crawford leaned forward. "That's a remarkable transformation." "It is. But the real question isn't whether the changes worked, it's whether they'll be sustained once the external pressure is removed." Henderson looked directly at Dick. "You see, it's easy to implement changes when your survival depends on it. The test of character is whether you maintain those standards when no one is watching." The tour that followed was unlike any factory visit Dick had ever conducted. Henderson moved through the facility with the practiced eye of someone who understood manufacturing at a fundamental level, asking technical questions about production flow, material handling, and quality control that revealed depths of knowledge Dick had never suspected. But it was the interaction with the employees that impressed the visitors most. Henderson spoke with line workers, supervisors, and technicians with genuine interest, asking about their experience with the changes and their suggestions for further improvements. "How do you like the new production layout?" he asked Maria Santos, who had worked at Blackwood for 12 years. "It's so much better, Mr. Henderson. Before, I was walking back and forth all day carrying materials. Now everything flows naturally. Less walking, less lifting, less stress on my back. And the quality control changes? Amazing! We catch problems immediately instead of finding them at the end of the line. It's actually more satisfying because we're making better products. Henderson nodded thoughtfully, then moved on to the next station. After an hour of touring, the group returned to the conference room where Henderson delivered his verdict. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand what you've witnessed today. 3 months ago, Dick Blackwood made some assumptions about me based on appearances and incomplete information. The room went silent. Those assumptions led him to lecture me about my own industry while dismissing my capabilities as a business owner. Dick felt his face burn with renewed embarrassment. But here's what I want you to remember about that evening. Dick's assumptions weren't malicious. They were human. We all make judgments based on limited information. Henderson walked to the window overlooking the factory floor. The difference between successful people and unsuccessful people isn't that successful people don't make assumptions. It's that successful people change their behavior when they discover their assumptions were wrong. He turned back to face the group. Dick Blackwood made assumptions about me, learned those assumptions were wrong, and then did something remarkable. He set aside his pride and implemented every single recommendation our team made, even when it meant admitting that his way of doing things wasn't optimal. Patricia Blackwood spoke for the first time since arriving. Are you saying you're satisfied with the changes? I'm saying I'm impressed by them. But more importantly, I'm impressed by the character Dick showed in implementing them. Henderson opened another folder. Which brings me to the real reason for today's meeting. Dick braced himself for whatever was coming. Blackwood Industries has transformed from one of our least efficient customers to one of our most valuable accounts. Your company now generates a 15.2% profit margin for Henderson Logistics, well above our average. Sarah Martinez, who had been taking notes throughout the meeting, looked up sharply. That's excellent news. It is. Which is why I'm here to offer Dick something I've never offered any customer in 40 years of business. Henderson pulled out a thick document. An exclusive partnership agreement. Henderson Logistics will become your dedicated supply chain partner, guaranteeing capacity, providing priority service, and sharing efficiency data that will help you optimize operations even further. Dick stared at the document. What does that mean in practical terms? It means that instead of competing with other customers for our services, you get guaranteed shipping capacity at preferred rates. It means our operational excellence team will conduct quarterly reviews to identify new efficiency opportunities. And it means that Henderson Logistics has a vested interest in your success. Jim Crawford, the attorney, leaned forward to examine the document. This is remarkably generous terms. It's good business. Dick has proven that he can learn, adapt, and implement changes effectively. Those are the qualities I want in a partner. Henderson looked around the table at the faces of everyone who had witnessed both his humiliation and his response to it. I want everyone here to understand something important. What happened at the engagement party wasn't really about me being insulted or Dick being embarrassed. It was about the assumptions we all make about success, intelligence, and worth. He paused, letting his words sink in. Dick assumed that because I dressed simply and drove an old car, I must be struggling financially. But the real lesson isn't about appearances. It's about respect. Henderson stood up. Respect shouldn't be conditional on someone's bank balance or job title. It should be given freely until someone proves they don't deserve it. Dick found his voice. Bill, I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. This partnership comes with expectations. The same standards that got you here need to be maintained going forward. If your efficiency drops, if your operations become sloppy, if you start taking success for granted, this agreement becomes void. Understood. Good. Because everyone in this room will be watching to see how this story continues. 6 months later, Dick Blackwood stood at the altar of the same church where he'd been baptized 40 years earlier, watching his daughter Jennifer marry Tommy Henderson. The transformation in his relationship with his future son-in-law's father had become the stuff of local business legend. Blackwood Industries was now operating at 89% efficiency, considered best in class for manufacturers their size. Employee satisfaction had increased dramatically, profits had grown by 65%, and the company had been featured in Manufacturing Today magazine as a case study in operational excellence. But the real change was in Dick himself. Gone was the casual arrogance that had once characterized his interactions with people he assumed were beneath him professionally. In its place was a genuine humility that had earned him respect throughout the business community. At the wedding reception, held at the same country club where the engagement party had taken place, Dick found himself standing next to William Henderson during the father of the bride speech. "Bill, I need to ask you something that's been bothering me for months." "What's that?" "Did you plan all of this from the beginning? The humiliation, the business transformation, the partnership agreement. Was it all calculated to teach me a lesson?" Henderson smiled, the same enigmatic expression Dick had learned to recognize over the past year. "Dick, I'm a businessman, not a philosopher. I saw an inefficient customer who had potential for improvement, and I created conditions that would motivate that improvement." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer you need." As Dick delivered his speech, welcoming Tommy into the Blackwood family, he looked out at an audience that included many of the same people who had witnessed his humiliation 9 months earlier. But this time, the story he was telling was different. "When I first met Bill Henderson," he said, "I made the mistake of judging him based on appearances rather than character. That mistake taught me the most valuable lesson of my professional life, that true success isn't about what you have. It's about what you do with what you have." The applause was genuine, reflecting the respect Dick had earned by acknowledging his mistakes and learning from them. Later, as the reception wound down, Henderson approached Dick one final time. "Dick, I want you to know that what happened between us wasn't personal." "I know." "Good. Because the best business relationships are built on mutual respect and shared success." "Is that what we have now?" Henderson extended his hand. "What we have now is a partnership between equals who understand that assumptions can be dangerous, but learning from mistakes is invaluable." Dick shook the offered hand, finally understanding that his humiliation had been transformed into something much more valuable: genuine respect earned through demonstrated character. As he watched Henderson walk away, still wearing khakis and a polo shirt, still driving the same Honda Accord, still looking like anything except one of the most successful businessmen in the region, Dick smiled. Some lessons, he realized, were worth every moment of embarrassment it took to learn them. The quiet man in khakis had taught him that true power didn't need to announce itself, and that the most profound changes often came disguised as simple acts of humility. It was a lesson Dick would never forget. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.